Hello, thanks for joining us for this episode of Into the Killing. If you know of any cold cases that were eventually solved you want us to cover on Into the Killing, please visit our website, criminallylisted.com, then go to the Suggest a Case page. You can also suggest cases for our two YouTube channels, Criminally Listed and Paranormally Listed. For this episode, we're going back to July 1970. On July 1st, 1970, for the first time in the United States, a state, California, allowed couples to file for no-fault divorce. The law was signed by then-Governor and future President Ronald Reagan. Previously in California, like the rest of the United States, if someone wanted to get divorced, they needed to show that someone in the marriage had breached the marital contract. In the following 15 years, many states passed laws allowing no-fault divorces. At the time of this writing, 17 states do not have no-fault divorces. Reagan, who was the first American president who had gone through a divorce, later said that signing the bill was the biggest mistake of his political life. On July 3, 1970, American Top 40 broadcasted for the first time. The show, hosted by Casey Kasem in Los Angeles, California, was first broadcast on 7 radio stations throughout the United States. Kasem had been working in radio broadcasting since he was in college. He was also a voice actor. He was the original voice of Shaggy in Scooby-Doo and Robin/Dick Grayson in Super Friends. American Top 40 started as a 3-hour show that played the 40 most popular songs in the USA. The first song played during the inaugural broadcast was The End of Our Road by Marvin Gaye. The first #1 song was Mama Told Me Not to Come by Three Dog Night. Kasem left the show in 1988 because of a contract dispute. Shadoe Stevens hosted for the next 7 years. In 1995, the show was canceled due to low ratings. 3 years later, in 1998, Casey Kasem revived the show and resumed hosting duties. Kasem hosted until 2004, then Ryan Seacrest became the host. Seacrest still hosts the weekly radio show. On July 4th, 1970, 3 young men, Roger Adams, Ken Bowers, and Michael Glassell, were partying in Portland, Oregon. The trio decided to do an after-hours visit to the Washington Park Zoo. They scaled a fence and walked around the zoo. 19-year-old Roger Adams was feeling daring. He climbed over the railing of the Grizzly Bear pit and then hung off the wall. He was able to climb back up. He did the same thing at the lion exhibit. There were 2 lions, a 16-year-old male named Caesar and an 11-year-old female named Sis, in the exhibit. As Adams dangled from the ledge, Sis jumped up and grabbed his ankle. Adams fell into the pit. His friends, Ken Bowers and Michael Glassell, tried to find help. When they were unable to, they went back to be with Adams. For the next 30 minutes, he was mauled to death by the lions. About 30 hours after the mauling, around 5 a.m., the police received a phone call from an anonymous caller. The caller said that the lions had been shot. A security guard checked on the lions and saw nothing wrong with them. Later that morning, they didn't eat. By noon, both lions were dead. They both had been shot with a foreign-made rifle. 2 years later, Ken Bowers was arrested for drugs. He then admitted he was the one who killed the lions. He felt it was his job to kill the animals that killed his best friend. He was given 3 years of probation. On July 30th, 1970, the #1 song on the Billboard charts was They Long to Be Close to You by the Carpenters. The #1 movie was the western Chisholm, starring John Wayne. In July 1970, 23-year-old Loretta Jones lived in Price, Utah. Price is in central Utah, and in 1970, it had a population of about 6,200 people. Loretta had 4 older half-siblings, 1 older full sibling, and 4 younger full siblings. The family were members of the Church of Latter-day Saints, also known as the Mormon Church. After high school, Loretta attended a Mormon college in Salt Lake City, Utah, where she studied accounting. But she only stayed at school for about 6 months. She was often homesick, and after having surgery on her chin for a cyst, she dropped out. She eventually finished college through correspondence classes. She then worked as a bookkeeper for her father's contracting business. In the summer of 1965, she became pregnant with her daughter, Heidi. She was dating several men and told one of the men he was the father. The man told her he was already married and wanted nothing to do with Loretta or the child. Loretta's father took the man to court. The blood test indicated that the man was not the father. It's unclear who Heidi's father is. Regardless, Heidi was born on Valentine's Day, 1966. 4 years later, in July 1970, Loretta still worked for her father's business. Heidi was 4 years old. They lived alone on a quiet street in Price. Heidi said that she had a wonderful mother. Loretta sewed clothes and dolls for her daughter. On the night of July 30th, 1970, Loretta was reading stories to Heidi while she laid in bed. Then there was a knock at the door. Loretta left the bedroom for a few minutes. Heidi heard her mother and the man talking, and then they raised their voices. When Loretta returned to the bedroom, she told Heidi that no matter what she heard, she was not to come out of the bedroom. Heidi eventually drifted off to sleep. The next day, Heidi woke up later than usual. Because her mother had told her to stay in her bedroom the night before, she decided to wait for her mother to come get her. But her mother never came for her. So Heidi looked out the keyhole in the bedroom door. She saw a strange scene. It looked like there was a pile of laundry on the living room floor. This was odd because her mother always kept the house very tidy. Heidi left her bedroom and found that the living room was splattered with blood. Her mother's dead body was on the living room floor. Heidi left the house and found her neighbor. The neighbor called the police. Loretta's partially clad body was on the living room floor. It was later determined she had been raped. She had been stabbed twice in the chest and 15 times in the back. It also appeared that the killer attempted to slit her throat. The murder weapon was never found. The police surmised that Loretta knew her killer. There were no signs of a break-in or forced entry. Nothing had been stolen from the house. Also, there didn't appear to be much signs of a struggle. Loretta did not put up much of a fight. She lived close to her neighbors who had their windows open that night. No one heard anything. It's believed that Loretta knew something bad was going to happen. She went into Heidi's bedroom and wanted to make sure that Heidi stayed in her room so that she wouldn't get hurt or see something horrible happen to her mother. Then, as Loretta was being murdered, she didn't scream or make too much commotion out of fear it would lure her daughter out of her bedroom. The police talked to 4-year-old Heidi. They asked her who was in her house last night, and she said it was Tom. She didn't know Tom's last name, nor could she describe him. Loretta's family did not know who Tom was. However, since Heidi knew him, he must have visited Loretta's home at least a few times. The police collected forensic evidence from the crime scene, including fingerprints, blood samples, and carpet and couch fibers. They were sent to the FBI. It turned out that Loretta Jones's murder wasn't the only crime that happened on the night of July 30th, 1970, in that quiet neighborhood in Price. Less than an hour earlier, 3 blocks north of Loretta's home, 11-year-old Lori Kulo was riding her bike near her home. Her brother and his friend were playing outside. As the sun was setting, she rode her bike home. Her brother and his friend were already inside. Suddenly, a man came up from behind her and grabbed her. He quickly pressed her up against the wall of her home, held her hands behind her back, stepped on her feet, and put his hand over her mouth. She tried to scream, but she couldn't. Then the man's hand slipped from her mouth and she managed to scream. The scream drew Lori's stepfather, brother, and his friend out of the house. The man ran south, and the trio gave chase. But they lost the man. The police thought it was very unlikely 2 different men committed the crimes. When the man ran away, he was heading in the direction of Loretta's home. The police believe he ended up at Loretta's home where he raped and murdered her. The police investigated all the usual angles when it came to a murder investigation. They were able to eliminate Loretta's boyfriend as a suspect. When Loretta became pregnant, she kept a diary. In her diary, she wrote about several men she was dating and the possibility that one of them was Heidi's father. The police thought it was possible that Loretta had informed one of them he was Heidi's father, and he snapped. However, the police were able to eliminate all the men as suspects. Then, on August 1st, 2 days after the murder, the police received an anonymous tip. The caller told them to investigate 29-year-old Tom Egley. For obvious reasons, the name stuck out to the police. Egley did odd jobs at a bar in Price, including coal cars. The police talked to Loretta's family, and they said they had heard about Egley. Loretta told them she had gone on one blind date with him, but didn't like him. They did not know she saw him after that blind date. The police tracked down Egley. At the time, Egley lived in a hotel in Helper, Utah, which is about 8 miles north of Price. He lived with his girlfriend, who was 8 months pregnant. Egley was interviewed by the police. He said he was in Price on the night of the murder. He had hitchhiked that night. He got a burger at a local fast food place and ate it while sitting on a curb. Then he walked around the city. Around 11 p.m., he ended up at the bar where he worked. He had a few drinks and then he went home. Egley gave the police the clothes he said he was wearing on the night of the murder. He also agreed to give his fingerprints and hair samples. It was all sent to the FBI for comparison. The police talked to the bartender who was working that night, and she confirmed that Egley had come to the bar. She noted that he seemed a little edgy. He also had red flecks on him. He went into the washroom and washed his hands and face. He said he got the flecks on him from doing a painting job for the bar's owner. The bar's owner said she never asked Egley to paint anything with red paint. Egley was interviewed for a second time by the police. At one point, he broke down crying while he was talking to a detective. The detective thought he was on the verge of confessing. Then another detective came into the room, and Egley regained his composure. Egley was asked to take a polygraph, and he refused. He then asked for a lawyer and stopped talking to the police. Days after the interview, the police got the test results from the FBI. The report said that fibers found on Egley's clothes were similar to fibers found on Loretta's rug. The case seemed logical to the police. Tom Egley was in Price, and he was horny and feeling the urge for violence. He attempted to rape 11-year-old Lori Kulo, but he was scared off. He ran 3 blocks and realized he was close to Loretta's home. He possibly went to her house to hide out. He still had violent sexual urges, and his adrenaline was pumping after escaping from the attempted rape. So he raped and stabbed Loretta to death. On August 31st, 1970, a month after the murder, Egley was arrested. Lori Kulo and her brother were brought to the police station to view Egley in a lineup. Lori said she had a hard time seeing through the screen, and she said she didn't think she saw the man who attacked her. Her brother picked out Egley. There was a pretrial hearing for Tom Egley in November 1970. The judge was to determine if there was enough evidence to go to trial. The only evidence against him was that Loretta's daughter, Heidi, said that Tom was in their home that night, and the carpet fibers. The problem was that since Egley had previously been in the house, the fibers could have got on his clothes during one of those previous visits. Also, Heidi was only 4 and didn't see Tom in her house or witness the murder. It's believed she just heard her mother say Tom while she argued with her killer. Finally, Lori's brother's identification did not help the murder case. There was no evidence that the attempted rape of Lori and the murder were connected. The judge ruled there was not enough evidence to go to trial, so the murder charges were dropped. It's unknown why they did not charge Egley with the attempted rape of Lori Kulo. Egley, who had been in jail since his arrest, was released. 2 years later, he moved out of the state. The murder of Loretta Jones went cold. Loretta's parents adopted 4-year-old Heidi. The murder had a tremendous effect on her father. He died 4 years after Loretta's murder at age 65. Then we come to July 2009. In July 2009, after spending several years in California, Heidi was back in Utah. In early July, Heidi's car was stolen. She was annoyed, and she posted about it on Facebook. David Brewer, a man who knew her from high school, commented on the post. Brewer was a detective with the Carbon County Sheriff's Office. They had been the agency that investigated her mother's murder. For over 2 decades, Heidi had been advocating to get her mother's case solved, but never had any luck. She messaged Brewer, and he agreed to talk with her. After telling Brewer about her mother's murder, he agreed to reopen the case. When he did, he hit a major roadblock. The box with all the evidence from Loretta's murder was gone. Detective Brewer thinks that someone threw the box out when they moved the evidence room to a new facility. So the only evidence from the case was information, like newspaper clippings, that Heidi had been collecting since 1989, which is 19 years after the murder. Something important she did have was 4 Polaroid pictures of the crime scene. Loretta's father had taken them for unknown reasons. Loretta's mother had them in a box of photos. Heidi found them one day while looking through the box. Undeterred, Detective Brewer continued to search for anything pertaining to the case. About 6 weeks after he reopened the investigation, he found a document at the state medical examiner's office. He learned that there had been a vaginal swab and semen was taken, but the swabs were most likely in the evidence box, which was gone. In October 2009, Detective Brewer interviewed the woman who was Tom Egley's girlfriend at the time of the murder. She had an unusual story about the night of the murder. She said that Egley didn't come home until 3 a.m. He immediately went into the bathroom and had a bath. He was still wearing his clothes when he bathed. The next day, he burned his clothes. Egley gave the police a different set of clothes and claimed they were the ones he was wearing on the night of the murder. The woman said that she told the police this back in 1970, but Detective Brewer does not think this is true. At the time, she was 8 months pregnant and may have been trying to protect the father of her child. Detective Brewer tracked down Egley. He was living in Rocky Ford, a city with a population of about 4,000 people in southeast Colorado. In March 2010, Brewer and his partner interviewed Egley at his home. He said he had nothing to do with the murder, but he did say some things that caught David Brewer's interest. For example, Egley claimed he had never been to Loretta's home, but he had previously said he had been there several times. This was his explanation for how the fibers got on his clothes. Detective Brewer asked him what should happen to the man who killed Loretta. Egley said it depended on if the man had killed again afterward. Egley was asked to take a polygraph exam, and once again he refused. Detective Brewer was incredibly suspicious. However, he still had the same problem. There was no physical evidence that Egley killed Loretta Jones. So the case went cold again. Then in 2011, Detective David Brewer went to a cold case seminar. At the seminar, he talked about Loretta Jones's case and his problems with the case. Someone suggested exhuming the body. They said they had done that with another case and found the killer's DNA. So Detective Brewer asked Heidi if they could exhume the body, and Heidi enthusiastically agreed. However, Loretta's mother refused to let the exhumation happen. Understandably, she was devastated by her daughter's murder. She just wanted her daughter to rest in peace. She also did not like to think about the murder. Loretta's mother thought that exhuming the body would have disturbed Loretta's peace, and it literally would have been digging up the past. So the case continued to sit cold. Then we come to 2016. It had been 46 years since 23-year-old Loretta Jones had been murdered. The three biggest movies at the American box office in 1970 were Love Story, Airport, and MASH. In 2016, there were Finding Dory, Rogue One, A Star Wars Story, and Captain America, Civil War. Two Canadian artists had the three biggest singles of 2016. The two biggest songs were Love Yourself and Sorry by Justin Bieber, and the third was One Dance by Drake, featuring Wizkid and Kyla. The three biggest songs of 1970 were Bridge Over Troubled Water by Simon and Garfunkel, They Long to Be Close to You by the Carpenters, and American Woman by the Guess Who. In 1970, All My Children, Monday Night Football, and the Groovy Ghoulies all debuted. TV shows that debuted in 2016 include Stranger Things, This Is Us, and The Good Place. In 1970, Judy Blume's Are You There, God? It's Me, Margaret, The Fantastic Mr. Fox by Roald Dahl, and Ringworld by Larry Niven were all published. While in 2016, Colleen Hoover's It Ends With Us, Trevor Noah's Born a Crime, and Margot Lee Shetterly's Hidden Figures were published. In June 2016, David Brewer and Heidi, whose last name was now Jones Assay, were finally able to get Loretta's body exhumed. A year earlier, in May 2015, Loretta's mother had died at age 90. When the body was exhumed, the investigation hit yet another roadblock. The coffin was waterlogged. Because of the water damage, it would be impossible to get foreign DNA if there was any to begin with. But the exhumation turned out to be helpful. There were several news stories about the exhumation. Shortly after they were published, a woman called Detective Brewer. She said she had been friends with one of Loretta's sisters. At the time of the murder, she was living with Loretta's parents while she attended college. The day after the murder, the woman went with Heidi and Loretta's father to Loretta's home to get some items for Heidi. While there, Loretta's father snapped the 4 Polaroid photos. The woman asked Brewer if he knew about the message written in blood. Brewer did not know about that. He looked at the Polaroids very closely. He saw that she had written T and O in blood on the rug. Brewer thought she probably was going to write an M, but then she died. The message indicated that Loretta knew her killer, and the only Tom in her life was Tom Egley. Detective Brewer ensured the local newspaper in Rocky Ford, where Egley lived, published a story about the exhumation. He didn't name Egley, but he told the reporter that the prime suspect in the murder lived in Rocky Ford. Brewer also implied that they had found DNA evidence. The day after Loretta's remains were reinterred, Detective Brewer got a call from Lisa Carter, a Rocky Ford resident. Carter said she knew Egley well. He was a friend of her father and her neighbor. After the article was published, Egley had asked her, quote, "How long did semen and DNA last?" unquote. It's unclear if Egley told Carter he had lived in Price or that he knew Loretta, but regardless, Carter realized that Egley was the suspect they had mentioned in the article. Carter told Brewer she believed that Egley was capable of murder. She told him about a disturbing encounter with Egley. There was a tree on her property, and some branches were hanging over onto his property. Carter caught Egley trying to cut down the tree with a chainsaw. She confronted Egley, and she claims he swung the chainsaw at her. Carter said he had a homicidal look in his eyes she found disturbing. Carter told Brewer she would help with her investigation any way she could. Brewer took her up on her offer. He asked her if she would wear a wire and talk to Egley. Lisa Carter agreed to do it. In July 2016, while wearing a wire, Carter visited Egley at his home. Carter's husband was a police officer who had recently been away for training. Carter told Egley the training seminars were in Utah. She said at the training seminar they had discussed Loretta Jones' case, and the person leading the seminar said that Egley was the prime suspect. Carter told Egley that the police had vaginal swabs with DNA on it. Their first conversation ended without Egley saying much about the murder. 2 days later, Carter returned to Egley's home and continued to talk about the murder. Then Tom Egley told her what happened on the night Loretta Jones was murdered. Egley said that he hitchhiked into Price and had a burger while sitting on a curb. He had been drinking that night. He went to Loretta's home and she let him inside. He tried to have sex with her, but she turned him down, so they argued. Loretta told him to keep it down because he might wake up Heidi. He said that Loretta went to Heidi's room. While she was gone, he stewed and became even more angry. He said he always carried a knife with him. When she returned to the living room, he pulled out the knife. He stabbed her, but she didn't die. He then raped her. Egley was adamant that although he had stabbed her first, he didn't rape her because she didn't say no. When he was done, he slit her throat and left. He took the knife home with him. He later tossed it in a river. Egley did not mention anything about attacking Lori Kulo. After Egley confessed, Lisa Carter convinced him to talk to the police. He agreed to talk to them on one condition: he couldn't be arrested at the interview. David Brewer agreed to the condition. On July 9, 2016, Brewer and another detective interviewed Egley at his home. He admitted he killed Loretta Jones, but maintained he did not rape her. He also denied attacking Lori. A month later, in August 2016, 76-year-old Tom Egley was arrested by U.S. Marshals and was extradited back to Utah. In October 2016, Egley pleaded guilty as part of a plea deal. He agreed to plead guilty to the murder if they dropped the rape charges. Egley thought it was odd that people still cared about murder that happened 46 years earlier. Loretta's family was bothered by his lack of remorse. For them, it had been 46 years of suffering and missing Loretta because he had selfishly and violently stolen her away from them. Egley was sentenced to the maximum at the time of the murder, which was 10 years to life. Loretta's daughter, Heidi, was happy the case was finally solved. She told Cold Case Files, quote, "This wasn't about closure, this was all about getting justice," unquote. Tom Egley died in prison in March 2024 at age 83. Thank you so much for listening to this week's episode. Like we said in the opening, if you have any cases to suggest for Into the Killing, Criminally Listed, or Paranormally Listed, please visit our website, criminallylisted.com. Well, that's all for this week. Thank you again for listening. Please stay safe and take care of yourself.